Hi, welcome to Studio on a Budget's Guide to Home Recording Volume 1. If you'd like to start recording your music at home, make a really hot demo tape, or even put together a studio on a budget, then this tape is for you. We'll be covering the basics of music recording, showing you how different types of equipment work, and giving you some good sound techniques to help get you started. We'll also talk about new technologies in recording and how to get the most out of some of the old technologies. And although we'll be covering mostly the basics since this is Volume 1, I'd like to encourage advanced home recording artists to watch as well. Hopefully you'll pick up some recording tips you can apply in your home studio. Since this is the new and revised edition of this tape, let's take a moment before we begin to look at the specific topics we'll be covering. That way you can zip around to the sections you most want information on, and you can use this video as an excellent reference tool. Also be aware that there are 2 more volumes of this series that cover more advanced home recording techniques. We'll begin with the basics, covering what you'll need in the way of a recorder to begin your career as an awesome home recording artist. We'll talk about some of your options, including analog recorders, digital recorders, and also computer-based recording systems, including standalone hard disk systems and personal computer-based systems. Then we'll talk about specific multi-track recording techniques, focusing on 4-track recording, since this is the cheapest and most widely used format of budget home recording artists everywhere. We'll talk about level meters, basic multi-track recording methods, and a great technique for conserving tracks called ping-ponging. Next, we'll get a little more advanced with combining techniques like ping-ponging plus live recording and mastering ping-ponging mastering. For all of us still using analog gear, we'll talk about noise reduction and getting rid of unwanted sound garbage. Finally, since many home recording artists play keyboard instruments and use drum machines, we'll discuss a great computer-oriented recording method called sequencing. All of this and much, much more. Although I want to focus mostly on techniques in these videos, you're going to need something to record onto, so let's talk briefly about some of your options. Ultimately, what you should buy will depend on 3 things. 1, your budget, 2, your skill level, and 3, what kind of sound quality you're going for. If you're just starting out, I recommend you pick up one of these. This is an analog 4-track recorder. I'll discuss them in depth later because all of the recording exercises we'll do on this tape will be recorded on a 4-track. This is the most inexpensive way to begin in home recording, and you can really do some amazing and high-quality things on a 4-track. You may not know this, but the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album was actually recorded on a 4-track. If you can afford it, I recommend you get one that runs at double speed, or 3 3/4 inches per second. These sound a lot better. Also look for a deck with either Dolby C, Dolby S, or DBX noise reduction. Here are a few other things to consider. Some recorders have a mixer built into them. If they don't, you'll have to buy one separately to mix down your song. If you're recording live music, look for a recorder that can record on all 4 tracks at the same time. Also look for a deck that lets you do smooth punches for fixing mistakes. Don't worry, I'll explain and demonstrate all of this later. Some decks let you adjust the speed for creating unique tape effects, and auto locators are great for zipping right to certain parts of your song. Also, if you can afford it, you might want to consider buying an analog 8-track recorder. These are basically the same as 4 tracks, but obviously have an additional 4 tracks available for recording. Believe me, once you start recording, you'll never seem to have enough tracks. Buy as many as you can afford. Analog 8 tracks come in reel-to-reel and cassette, and although the reel-to-reels are technically superior, some of the cassette-based 8 tracks sound really, really good. I've used one for years and been really happy with it. From here we jump into the really pro machines, including 16 tracks and 24 tracks. If you're ready for 24 tracks, you don't need this video, so turn it off now and demand your money back. Now let's talk about your digital options. Digital recording is getting cheaper and cheaper, and it's definitely the way the industry is going. Digital recorders don't have any of the problems associated with some analog recorders like tape hiss, limited frequency response, and wow and flutter. On the home recording end, you have several options for digital recording. Tape-based, or what's being called modular digital multitracks, mini-disc-based multitracks, and computer-based hard disk recorders, including standalone hard disk recorders and computer-based systems. Let's begin by looking briefly at the very popular modular digital multitracks, or MDMs. Presently, there are two competing formats in the MDM arena. One which records digital audio on an SVHS tape, and one that records on a Hi8 tape. They're both great, and they both claim certain advantages over the other. Many people are using these decks to record CDs right at home because they really do offer amazing digital quality. On top of their sonic advantages, these machines can also do another amazing thing. You can chain them together to increase your tracks as your budget permits. That's right, you can start with 8 tracks and then later just buy another machine and synchronize the two together to have 16 tracks. Then later you can expand to 24 tracks and so on. Unbelievable. This is why they're called modular. A fairly new entry on the home recording front is the arrival of mini-disc-based systems. This is a mini-disc, and it's a completely random access format, like audio CDs, and thus perfect for recording. You can jump around right to the section you want without fast forwarding. Plus, the format is digital, which means amazingly good fidelity and no tape hiss. This is a great, inexpensive format, and you should check it out. The mini-disc is also a great mastering format. Another option is to use your computer to record. You're probably thinking, no way, but it's true. By purchasing digital audio sound cards and installing them and the appropriate software into your computer, you can actually use your computer and its hard disk like a multi-track recorder. Sophisticated programs let you do almost all of the things that tape-based recorders can do and do it better. For example, if you want to go to the end of the song, you just click the mouse and you're there. No more waiting. Plus, you can use the computer to manipulate the sound to create all kinds of interesting effects. There's way too much to go into here, but if you're computer proficient, you might want to look into this. A couple of quick things you should know though. First, you'll need a lot of memory and/or hard disk space to record audio in high fidelity. Second, it can be an expensive thing to get into. And third, some recording programs are more sophisticated than others. Some computer-based recording devices won't allow you the kind of flexibility that tape-based systems may offer, including signal routing, ease of use, and recording time. Also available are standalone hard disk-based digital recorders. These are basically computers in a box. They're great because you don't have to buy a computer or software to start recording. Everything is built right in. You still get the non-linear benefits of hard disk recording, but without the other computer stuff you may not need. Check these out too if you don't have or you don't need a computer. Whatever format you decide to record on, you'll need to know certain basic techniques. So let's start at the beginning and talk about basic multi-track recording. Well, the first place to begin any recording is with a song, and I've just finished writing a simple little tune. It has 4 parts: drums, bass, guitar, keyboards, and it goes something like this. Well, okay, I admit the song's probably not going to go platinum, possibly aluminum, but it will be a good illustration of basic multi-instrument recording. In the song we'll be recording, there are 4 instruments: piano, guitar, bass, which I played from a bass synthesizer, and drums from a digital drum machine. Throughout this video, we'll be assuming that you'll be recording 1 instrument at a time. This recording technique is called overdubbing. Here's the equipment we'll be using to record the song: a multi-track recorder, in this case a 4-track, a cassette deck to record or master our finished song, and a mixer. In case you're just starting out, a mixer is a device that takes 2 or more audio signals and mixes them together so that you can adjust the volume of each individual instrument. The order in which you record your parts is up to you, but the rhythm track should almost always be the first ones recorded, since you'll probably need a beat to play along to. I've programmed the rhythm section to this song into a digital drum machine. This is a multi-track recorder, a 4-track, one of the most important first purchases to any home studio. Although I'm sure you're probably familiar with the theory behind multi-tracking, let's define it anyway. A multi-track recorder is a tape recorder designed to record multiple independent adjacent tracks. What does that mean? Well, let me show you how a typical cassette is divided up on a 4-track. Okay, here we are inside of a typical cassette tape. Your home cassette deck divides the tape up into 4 tracks. Side 1 left and side 1 right, which run here and here going this way, and side 2 left and side 2 right, which run here and here going this way. A 4-track recorder also divides the tape up into 4 tracks, but all 4 tracks run the same direction. Easy, huh? Yeah, you're right, that didn't make any sense. Sorry, I couldn't resist the special effect. In a 4-track recorder, the recorder divides the tape into 4 independent tracks, but all 4 tracks go the same way, so we don't have sides 1 and 2 as we normally think of them. This allows the artist to record a separate part on each track. For example, in the song I recorded, I could put the drum part on track 1, the bass part on track 2, the guitar part on track 3, and the piano track on track 4. First, let's put the drums on track 1. First, I patched the output of the drum machine into the input of track 1 on the 4-track recorder. This is called patching direct because we're not using a microphone. This will give us a very clean sound, and I recommend patching direct whenever possible. Before we can record the drums, we have to set our recording levels. Adjusting the recording level properly is really important for getting a good recording, so you should know how to read your meters. You'll find level meters on your tape recorder and your mixer, but they work the same on both devices. The most common type of meter is the VU meter. VU stands for volume units, and it gives you an average indication of how loud your music is. VU meters come in 2 flavors, standard and LED, but they both work the same. Let's look at the VU meter on our cassette deck to examine how we would use an LED VU meter to adjust proper recording levels. I want to record the signal as loud as possible without having the needle linger in the red zone. Try to keep the needle in the safe area, which is just to the left of the red zone. Don't worry if the needle jumps into the red occasionally, we just don't want it there all the time. Here the level is too loud, and here it's probably too soft. And remember, if your song has loud and soft parts, set the recording level for the loudest part of the song. This song starts with a quiet hi-hat, so I'll wait till the drums kick in to set the level. Some VU meters also have a peak LED indicator. Adjust these like a standard VU, but watch the LED for too many peaks, which the VU meter may not respond to, especially on percussion tracks. Most of all though, use your ears. They can tell you a lot more than the meters can. Obviously, you should set your recording levels before you actually record. Okay, here we go. Next comes the bass track on track 2. Again, I'm patching direct, so the procedure stays pretty much the same. Okay, the 3rd track is a guitar track. Now it's time to break out the microphone. Since this is an electric guitar, I'm patching the guitar into an amp to get the sound I like, then putting a microphone right on top of the speaker. Although we'll be talking about miking techniques later on in the series, this technique is called close miking, and we use it to help minimize outside noise from leaking through the microphone and into the guitar track. Finally, the digital piano can also be patched direct, and it goes on track 4. We are now finished with the recording process and ready to begin what I think is the fun part, mixing down. Many 4-track recorders have primitive mixers built into them. These will work fine if all you want to do is control the relative levels of each track. If you want to process any of the tracks as well, for example, add some reverb to the drums, you'll need a mixer like the one we used earlier. If you can't afford a mixer, experiment with adding any effects you want while you record. But be careful, recording tracks with effects means you're stuck with that effect, so choose carefully and experiment. Mixing down involves adjusting the proper levels of each track while copying your original 4-track tape to a tape that is 2-track stereo, usually a reel-to-reel, or I like to use VHS Hi-Fi. On this 8-channel mixer, I've patched tracks 1 through 4 on the 4-track into tracks 1 through 4 on the mixer and labeled them accordingly. The left and right outputs of the mixer go to the machine I'm mixing to, in this case, a cassette recorder. When we've mixed a song, our master tape will be on cassette in this case, and we can make all the copies we need from that tape. To mix, we start our master recorder recording, our 4-track player playing, and then adjust the level of each individual track over here on the mixer. We can also adjust the EQ of each track and add special effects like reverb and delay if we have any. But rather than getting into mixing too far at this point, let's delve further into the world of multi-track recording. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve I'd like to show you. Get out of there. Murphy's Law of multi-track recording says no matter how many tape tracks you have, you'll always need 4 more. With this depressing thought in mind then, let's talk about some ways to get the most number of tracks out of your 4-track recorder, although the same tips can be applied to an 8 or even a 12-track machine. The first trick is a tried and true one. It's called ping-ponging because you're bouncing tracks around to create new empty tracks. Let's say I've decided to put a keyboard solo on my song. I now have 5 tracks to record: drums, bass, guitar, piano, and a keyboard solo. 5 tracks to record, 4 tracks available on my 4-track recorder. Well, it's time to play a little ping pong. Ping-ponging requires very careful planning. You must plan exactly how you're going to record before you start recording. Here's how we do it. Like before, we record the drums on track 1, the bass on track 2, and the guitar on track 3. But before we record the piano part, we're going to mix down tracks 1 through 3 and record them on track 4. If your 4-track is unable to route the signal internally, you can accomplish bouncing like this. First, turn the pan knobs on tracks 1 through 3 all the way left. This sends the mix of these tracks only to the left output of the 4-track. Now connect a patch cord from the left channel output of the 4-track to the input on track 4. Set it up to record on track 4. Set your playback levels on tracks 1 through 3 and your record level on track 4 and begin recording. When you're finished, listen to your mix on track 4. If it's not perfect, you can try again as many times as you like until it is perfect. You now have drums, bass, and guitar on track 4, and tracks 1 through 3 are now available to record new parts. If you have a mixer, the connection is like this. If you're like me, you'll want to make your recordings in stereo. But this is one of those things that sounds easy but requires very careful planning, especially when you're ping-ponging. So let's talk for a moment about stereo. On most multi-track recorders and all stereo mixers, there is a special knob called the pan control. This knob allows you to decide where you want a track to lie in the stereo field. Let's say, for example, you recorded a guitar part on track 2. By turning the pan knob, you can pan the guitar hard left, that is, it will only be heard from the left channel, hard right, it will only be heard from the right channel, center, it will be heard equally loud from both channels, or anywhere in between left and right. Watch the left and right levels on the master VU meters as I pan from left to right. In order to know where to pan each track, let's look at a band playing on stage. In this band, there's a guitarist on the left side of the stage, drums and bass in the middle, and a guitarist on the right. When panning, try to create a stereo field that suggests the band is playing on a stage in front of you. In this case, I would pan guitar left, the bass in the middle, the drums in various positions in the field, and the other guitarist on the right. Experiment with different panning positions too. Try expanding the pan of the drums to make the drum set seem huge. Also, when you're mixing, try panning an instrument while it's playing. But too much live panning can be a little too psychedelic, so don't overkill. If you'd like your finished song to be in stereo, you have to plan for this from the start, especially if you'll be doing a lot of ping-ponging. It's helpful to make a chart of all the parts you'll be recording and where you want them to be panned during the mixdown. This is an example of a recording preparation sheet. In fact, here's the preparation sheet for a 7-part song I'm about to record on a 4-track recorder. As you can see, I had several obstacles right from the start. First, I wanted the end result to be in stereo, so I couldn't mix tracks together that wouldn't ultimately share the same stereo image. You can see that I have some things center panned. In other words, the signal comes out equally loud from both right and left channels. This is also called mono, by the way. I wanted the piano and backup vocal to be panned left, and the electric guitar to be panned right. Now, since a track can only be panned one direction at a time, I knew that ultimately the piano and backup vocal would share a track, panned left, the electric guitar would have its own track, panned right, and everything else could be shared or divided among the remaining 2 tracks. Also, as I said earlier, I'm always concerned about how many times I transfer or bounce tape tracks. Remember, each time a tape track is bounced, it is said to have gone down 1 generation. And every time you go down a generation, the sound quality is a little bit worse. For this reason, I like to decide beforehand how many generations I'm willing to sacrifice for each track. This is how I figure out the best way to record the song. I like to keep percussive tracks and main vocal tracks down to an absolute minimum of generation losses, as these are usually the most important to the song and the first to sound bad when they start getting bounced around a lot. So with these 2 elements in mind, preserving stereo imaging and minimizing generation losses, let's look at 3 ways to record this 7-part song onto a 4-track recorder. The first thing to do is to write down your ultimate goals. In my case, it was 1, make a lot of money, 2, achieve national recognition, 3, establish world peace, and 4, transgress reality as I know it. I soon decided, however, a more realistic goal would be to write down my ultimate goals for each part in the song based on each part's pan position and the number of generations I would allow for each, and the number of tracks I had available, in this case 4. Here I've simply assigned the parts to individual tracks based on the recording procedure chart we've just looked at. Since I had 2 tracks available to divide the center pan parts among, I decided to separate the lead vocal track and record it alone on track 3. Why? Well, I find it especially important to have control over the level of the vocals when I'm mixing, so I try to make it a point of keeping the lead vocal on a separate track whenever possible. Once I've decided where I want to go, I have to decide how I'm going to get there. This is where a recording procedure chart comes in really handy. You can see before you begin recording the best ways to lay down your tracks. I played around with a number of variations and came up with this 10-part recording plan. Let's talk through it. Step number 1. The first thing I always record is the drums, if I'm using a drum machine. Here I put them on track 1. Many times if I'm recording a live drummer, I record the drums and bass at the same time, but on different tracks. Here I waited until step number 2 and recorded the bass next on track 2 while listening to the drums on track 1. I now have drums on track 1, bass on track 2. Since I decided earlier that I would eventually combine the drums, bass, and guitar solo parts onto one track, pan center, I now went to step number 3 and recorded the guitar solo on track 3. At this point I'm almost out of tracks, so now it's time to free up some tracks and begin ping-ponging. Step number 4. I set up to bounce tracks 1, 2, and 3 to track 4. First I do a dry run to set the proper recording levels. When I feel comfortable with my mixing ability, I start the machine recording on track 4, playing on tracks 1 through 3, and begin bouncing. When I'm done, I play track 4 and listen to my mix. If I didn't like it, I could simply try again, but it turned out pretty well. So it's on to step number 5. Since the drums, bass, and solo are on track 4 now, tracks 1 through 3 are free for recording new stuff. So the piano part is recorded on track 2. This leaves only tracks 1 and 3 empty. At this point, I might just record the backup vocal part on one of the empty tracks and then bounce the backup vocal and piano tracks onto the other empty track. But I've run into a problem. I don't know about you, but I can't sing a backup vocal track without hearing the lead vocal, and I wanted to wait until the end to record the lead vocal, since it won't be bounced around. Do we give up and scrap the song? No. It's time for an old studio trick. Step number 6, recording a scratch track. A scratch track is a reference track only. It won't be used in the final song, but it's only there to help you out if you need to hear a part to record another part. It's called a scratch track because you'll use it to listen to now and scratch it as soon as you're finished with it. Once the lead vocal scratch track is on track 1, we move to step number 7, recording the backup vocal. At this point, it's starting to sound like a real song. We can listen to the drums, bass, guitar solo on track 4 and scratch vocal on track 1 while we record the backup vocal on track 3. Step number 8, bounce time again. We no longer need the scratched vocal track on track 1, so we bounce tracks 2 and 3, backup vocal and piano, onto track 1. At this point, we've completed all the bouncing, and we now have 5 parts split up among 2 tracks. Not bad. We even have 2 tracks left to record our remaining 2 parts. So, obviously, step number 9, record the electric guitar on track 2. And step number 10, record the lead vocal on track 3.
This is a demo, this is a demo.
At this point, we're ready to mix. So like before, I'll patch tracks 1 through 4 on the 4 track into channels 1 through 4 on the mixer. Remember, since the piano and backup vocal are both on track 1, I can't adjust the volume on one without changing the volume on the other. This same thing goes for the drums, bass, guitar solo track on track 4. This is the big drawback of ping-ponging. Hopefully, though, we've got a good relative mix for these tracks earlier when we're bouncing. As previously decided, I panned the piano and backup vocal on track 1 hard left, the electric guitar on track 2 hard right, the vocal on track 3 center, and the drums, bass, and guitar solo on track 4 center. I've decided that the mix doesn't need any EQ or effects at this point, so all I do to begin mixing is to start my mastering recorder recording, start the 4-track playing, and have at it.
This is a demo, this is a demo.
Voila, a completed 7-part song in stereo. No one said it would be easy, but if you're after high quality, you have to pay the price. Assuming this is our goal, high quality that is, let's look at an even better way to record this song. This is method 2, ping-ponging plus live recording. With this method, we conserve generation losses by bouncing recorded tracks and recording new tracks at the same time. As you can see on our chart, we've cut the number of steps down from 10 to 8, which is pretty impressive. We've also cut the number of generation losses on 2 parts, the backup vocal and the guitar solo, which, as you know, means better fidelity and less noise. Steps 1 and 2 are just like last time, so let's look at step number 3. Instead of recording the guitar solo on track 3 and then bouncing 1, 2, and 3 to track 4, we're going to save the solo from the dreaded generation loss by recording it while at the same time mixing it with the other parts. We do this by first patching tracks 1 and 2 into the mixer and adjusting their levels. Now patch the guitar into another mixer channel and adjust its level. Finally, patch the output of the mixer into the input of track 4 like we did before. Start the 4-track recording and wail away on the guitar. As you might have guessed, it will probably take you a couple of tries to get a good mix, since you're just guessing. If we run the guitar direct into the mixer, as opposed to miking it, we'll be able to set our levels perfect the first time by monitoring the mix through our headphones or through a pair of speakers. Of course, we give up the control of having the tone of the amp on the guitar. We do the same thing with the piano backup vocal track in step 6, thus cutting another generation loss. If you make a mistake, however, you'll have to start at the beginning again, a disadvantage of this technique. Of course, you can always combine any and all of these techniques as you may need them. Give this one a try, though. The generation losses you save make it a real winner for recording with a limited number of tracks. Let's say you'd like to record this song with all 7 parts, but you don't want any of the parts to share the same stereo position. None of them will be panned hard left or hard right, and none of them can be bounced together since they won't be panned in exactly the same direction. There are 2 things you can do. First, record your first 4 parts on 4 different tracks. In this case, we would record the drums on track 1, the bass on track 2, the piano on track 3, and the electric guitar on track 4. Now we're going to mix down the song onto a 2-track recorder exactly as if we were mastering the finished song, even though we haven't added the vocals or solo yet. Remember, we patch each track into the mixer if we have one, and that goes into our mastering recorder. I now adjust the pan positions that I want for each track. I wanted the drums to be a little bit to the right of center, the bass to be center, the piano to be nearly hard right, and the electric guitar to be nearly hard left. I start the master recorder recording and begin mixing. When I'm finished, the first thing I do is listen to the mix and see if I'm happy with it. If not, I try again. Now what I'm going to do is bounce this stereo submix back to tracks 1 and 2 on the 4-track, leaving the other 2 tracks for our remaining parts. It's called a submix because it's just a partial mix, not the completed mix. I'll need to repatch so the connection will look something like this. I now have the left and right channels of the song on tracks 1 and 2. I have tracks 3 and 4 left for the remaining parts, the guitar solo, the backup vocal, and the main vocal. Wait a minute, that's 3 parts, but only 2 tracks left. What do? No problem. we can go back to method 2, bouncing plus live recording. First, we record the main vocal on track 3. Then we run track 3 to the mixer and bounce it to track 4 while at the same time recording the backup vocal just like we did a few minutes ago. We then have both vocal tracks on track 4. This frees up track 3 to record the guitar solo. It's time to mix again, so we make our connections like before. Since we have our stereo submix on tracks 1 and 2, we pan track 1 hard left and track 2 hard right. We can then pan tracks 3 and 4 anywhere we'd like. I'll put the guitar solo on track 3 a little bit left and the vocals in the center. Then we mix as usual. I should also mention quickly that if you have a friend who also has a 4-track recorder, you can also mix your first 4 tracks down to tracks 1 and 2 on his machine, which will leave you tracks 3 and 4 for recording 2 more tracks. This may save you a generation loss, but you have to find an unselfish friend. Let's talk about a great little recording technique called punching in. Punching in involves going directly from the play mode to the record mode. Let's say I made a mistake on the piano part during the last song. I could start over, but I really like the way I played the beginning part, so there's no point in erasing that part. Here's what we do. We set the 4-track in the record standby mode for track 2, which is the piano track. Most multi-track recorders allow you to punch in via a foot pedal of some sort, which is great because it allows you to keep both of your hands free for playing. On this recorder, there is a button which puts the machine into the sync mode. This will allow us to play back the piano part on track 2 up until the very moment we want to punch in and begin recording. We can also listen to the other tracks while we record, since we'll only be punching in on track 2. As you can see, here is where I made the piano mistake on track 2. First, I'll go back 10 seconds or so and look for a good blank spot to punch in. I usually look for a rest or a pause of some sort in the piano track.
This is a demo, this is a demo.
Here are some tips for punching in. Number 1, try to punch in on the beat. Some cheaper recorders make an audible click when you punch in, and this can be masked by punching in on the beat, during a snare drum for example. If you don't have a blank spot to punch in on, run the tape back a little further and play along with the tape exactly the same way you originally recorded the part. Then punch in anytime you want, and usually it will sound as if you never made an edit. First I'll listen to the old track to refresh my memory. Then I'll begin playing along with it, and then punch in when there's a good spot.
This is a demo, this is a demo.
You can also punch out if you just want to correct a short segment on one track. Punching out can be less accurate than punching in though, so try to punch out as early as possible so you don't erase material after the punch out point. Punch out during long breaks, especially on noisy instruments like guitars. If you're not going to be playing for 2 minutes, punch out. There's no point in cluttering up the rest of the mix with your noisy guitar if you're not playing. Number 5, be careful. Remember, when you punch in, you're erasing whatever you had after the punch in point. So double check everything. Happy punching. While we're on the subject of tape recorders, it's worth taking a moment to talk about noise and noise reduction. The elimination of noise can mean the difference between a good sounding recording and a great one. We're all familiar with noise and no one I know likes it. Basically, noise is any unwanted sounds that enter your recording. Let's listen to some of my favorite types of noise. Each of these types of noise is completely different from the others, so let's tackle them individually. What causes tape hiss? Well, basically it's just a side effect of the way analog tape is recorded. And unless we go digital, we're always going to have some tape hiss. But don't get too discouraged, because there are all kinds of ways we can minimize it, and I recommend them all. First, record on the fastest tape speed possible. The faster the tape passes over the head, the better its signal-to-noise ratio. That is, the relative loudness of the main audio compared to the noise in the recording. The higher the signal-to-noise ratio, the less noise will be heard, and of course, the better the recording will sound. Most cassette recorders poke it along at a mere 1 7/8 inches per second. Friends, this ain't very fast. Some 4-track cassette recorders can go twice normal speed, or 3 3/4 inches per second. This is definitely the way to go if your budget allows only cassette recording. I've used this format for years and made some great sounding tapes. Moving on up to reel-to-reel tapes, the tape speed increases dramatically. The slowest speed used by professionals is 7.5 inches per second. Some reel-to-reels can go slower, but the slower speed should never be used for recording music. The next step up in speed and price is 15 inches per second, and professional reel-to-reel recorders travel at a whopping 30 inches per second. If you're mastering, consider VHS or Beta Hi-Fi recorders. The rating speed on these units can be as much as 18 feet per second. The next step up is to go digital, either with a VCR and a PCM digital encoder or a DAT recorder. Digital tapes are next to impossible to splice manually though, so keep that in mind. The second way to reduce tape hiss is with noise reduction circuitry, and this circuitry may be built in or used externally. The 3 most popular types of noise reduction are Dolby B, Dolby C, and DBX. Dolby B is the standard noise reduction you'll find on any home cassette deck, and it works fairly simply. When the audio signal is recorded, the Dolby B circuitry adds a certain amount of treble or highs to the signal. This is known as the encoding process. When you play back the signal, it cuts back these highs, taking any tape hiss that may have been added down with it. This is, of course, the decoding process. Dolby B is nice because if you don't decode the signal, it will just sound a little brighter or more trebly. Unfortunately, it only works so well, and for most pro needs, we need something more. So, they came out with Dolby C. Dolby C is a much improved version of Dolby B. It reduces substantially more tape hiss than Dolby B, but it must be decoded when played back, or your music can sound really weird. By all means, go for a deck with Dolby C if you can afford it. It works really well. The third major type of noise reduction is DBX. You either love DBX or you hate it. I love it, so I recommend it very highly. Here's how DBX works. Instead of boosting the highs, DBX works by compressing the entire audio signal down 1/2 during recording, then expanding the signal when it's played back. Of all these methods, DBX offers the most noise reduction. So why doesn't everyone use it? Well, on certain types of music, DBX occasionally has the tendency to breathe. The breathing is the DBX wiping out the noise. This bothers some people, but I've never had a problem with it. Try it out and see how it affects your music. Most noise reductions are built into the recorders, but some can be used externally, like this Dolby unit and this DBX unit. Try to get the built-in ones if you can. There are also single-ended noise reduction units that can remove some tape hiss on music you've already recorded. These work by reducing the highs relative to the volume of the music. These units can work in a pinch, but my advice is don't expect too much. The third way to reduce tape hiss is with a noise gate. A noise gate actually functions like a gate. When the audio level drops to a certain point, the gate closes and no more sound gets through. The trick is to set the gate to close just above the noise floor, that is, the quietest part of the tape, just above the tape hiss and other noise. This is called setting the threshold of the gate. You patch the recorder or mixer into the noise gate, and now the gate will stay closed whenever there is no music playing, thus eliminating the noise. As soon as the music kicks in, the gate will open, and the music will mask the tape hiss, hopefully. So to sum up tape hiss, I recommend using Dolby C or DBX noise reduction. If you still have problems, use a noise gate. So much for tape hiss. Let's move on to some other nasty types of noise. Hum can be caused by several things. The most common type of hum is called a 60 Hz hum, and it's caused by the electricity in your studio floating around and getting into your audio cables. Try to keep all AC cables away from audio cables. If they must cross them at 90 degrees. Tying up your cables is a great idea. Also, check to make sure all your equipment is grounded properly. Use the third prong on the AC cords if you have it. If you still hear hum, it might be coming from your synthesizer or old piece of equipment. maybe time to upgrade or buy a noise gate. Also, try moving your mixer away from your power amps. If you can hear radio stations along with your music, it's RF interference. RF stands for radio frequency, and you hear it when your audio cables think they're antennas. This can be a real problem. It occurs in unbalanced cables as opposed to balanced cables. This is a balanced cable, this is an unbalanced one. A balanced cable will terminate in a 3-prong connector called an XLR plug. An unbalanced cable will end in anything else, usually a 1/4 inch or phono jack, or an RCA or phone jack. I also think it was dumb to name one phone and one phono. So what's the difference between balanced and unbalanced? I'm glad you asked. An unbalanced cable has 2 wires in it, one ground wire, and one hot wire carrying the signal. This type of cable is very prone to pick up FM signals in the air, so keep these cables as short as you possibly can. This is a balanced cable used by most pros. It has 3 wires instead of 2. One is ground and the other 2 are hot but out of phase, which cancels out any noise the cable may have picked up. Definitely use balanced lines whenever possible. If your microphone uses balanced lines but your recorder has unbalanced jacks, pick up one of these matching transformers or one of these direct boxes. These match up your balanced and your unbalanced stuff and take care of all that impedance matching stuff you'd rather not worry about. If you still have problems, try using an AC power strip that filters out RF. Most computer stores sell them, and it may cut out some hum too, so it's a good investment. Besides, most power strips like these are fused, which can protect all your expensive electronic stuff if there's a power hit. One more suggestion, avoid bunching your cables up. If you hear RF, try moving your cables around a little and see if it clears up. One of the newest ways of recording music is the high-tech world of computer sequencing. That's right, like everything else, the recording industry is getting computerized, and musicians are using computers instead of, and in addition to tape recorders, to record their music. Let's start by defining sequencing. Sequencing involves the use of a computer to record musical information. Since all sequencers are computers of some type, we'll refer to them as simply sequencers. Before I explain how it works, though, remember, computers can't record music, they can only record information or data. So in order for us to use computers to record music, we must first change music into data. How do we do that? Well, one of the answers is MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. If you've bought a keyboard or drum machine in the last few years, look on the back and chances are you'll find a MIDI jack. It looks something like this, and there are usually 3 of them. An in jack for accepting information into that instrument, an out jack for outputting information to other devices, and a through jack which simply passes on any information that comes into the in jack. You're probably wondering what this has to do with recording. Well, MIDI translates music into information, and on a keyboard it works like this. When you hit a key on a digital keyboard, information is sent out to the MIDI out jack. Information like what key you hit, how hard you hit it, how long you held it down, whether the sustain pedal was pressed, you get the idea. If the keyboard's MIDI out jack is connected to a computer sequencer's MIDI in jack, that information can be recorded by the sequencer and sent back later to the keyboard to recreate exactly what you played. Pretty impressive, huh? It's a lot like a very high-tech player piano. We've all seen player pianos, and the way they work is pretty simple. A player piano records information about what the performer played and stores it onto a paper scroll. This information can then be sent back to the piano to play it live. The sequencer does exactly the same thing, but uses memory chips instead of paper scrolls. It's called sequencing because the computer records the data you send it sequentially, one piece at a time. In this studio, we have 2 keyboards and a drum machine connected via MIDI to a home computer. Although you can buy dedicated sequencers, I'm using a home computer with the appropriate software and interfaces to turn it into a sequencer. This is an expensive way to get a sequencer, but you can always use the computer to do your taxes or to write letters when you're not recording music. Let's say I want to record a piano track. First, I tell the computer to receive information from the piano. Then I tell it to begin recording. Come over here, play my little ditty on the piano. Now I tell the computer to stop recording information. To play back what I've recorded, I simply reverse the procedure. I tell the computer to send the information back to the piano, like this. Voila! The really nice thing about sequencing is that since I'm not recording on tape, there is no tape hiss or any of the problems associated with tape. Also, since I've recorded only information on the sequencer, I can try out the piano track I've just recorded on any of the sounds that my keyboard is capable of generating. For example, this keyboard has 8 different sounds: 6 pianos, 2 harpsichords, vibes, and a clavichord. Let's tell the computer to send out the information again. Now let's page through this keyboard sounds until we find the one we want to use. Can't do that with a tape recorder. Let's talk about some of the other great things sequencers can do. Almost all sequencers allow you to edit what you've played. That's right, if you hit a wrong note, you can fix it really easily. You can copy sections or delete sections just by selecting and moving them around, just like you would do in a word processor. You can adjust the volume of individual tracks just like on a mixer, even automate the mix by having the sequencer remember volume changes throughout the song. You can slow down or speed up the tempo, or even program tempo changes. And the list goes on and on. Thank you for watching. I hope you've picked up some useful tips for recording at home or in the studio. We've gone through a lot of the basics and hopefully given you some insight into the sometimes confusing world of multi-track recording. Just to whet your appetite though, here's a preview of what you can expect in future volumes. Good luck recording.